It's always a party at Patchworks. Let's get this party started. Woot, woot. Hi, everyone. This is Julie from Patchworks, and I'm so excited that you're joining us tonight for block one of My Favorite Color is Moda for Must Sew TV Thursday. Tonight, in our Thursday series, we are kicking off this fun quilt along, which is a sampler quilt featuring Bella Solids. We showed you a few weeks ago the 6 different color options that were available, and we have kits available for all of them still. Make sure to check the link below for all of the different color stories. So today what we're going to do is that we're going to talk about block one, and yes, isn't this a giant block? You totally could make this block, just border it up and finish it into a small baby quilt. This is going to be block one for the quilt. It's the largest block in the quilt. We're going to talk about elements for precision piecing. We are going to talk about the notions that you need for that. We're going to talk about how to keep track of your fabrics. We're going to talk about proper cutting. And then we're going to make some half square triangles. So let's get started. I have assembled some great notions that are going to help us with precision piecing. So let's take a look at what I have assembled here for us. And when I'm precision piecing, I really like to prepare my fabric with some starch. My favorite starch product is Quilter Starch Savvy, which is a starch alternative, and it is scent-free and color-free so that you're not adding any fragrance or color to your fabrics. You need to have a sharp rotary cutter. My favorite size is the 45mm. You can use it in the straight cut or the ergo, whichever design you prefer. If you have a rotary cutter that's sitting in your drawer that you've been using for a long time, make sure to get some fresh blades for your new project. Seam rippers. The Clover 482 is my favorite seam ripper. It can help you unstitch when you make any mistakes along the way. You know, sometimes we do have to unstitch things. Just like needles and rotary blades, seam rippers wear out. So if you have been struggling when you've been unstitching these days, make sure to pick up a new seam ripper to make your job go faster. On the sewing machine for precision piecing, my favorite needle is the Microtex 7010 by Schmetz. A good piecing thread is the Orfil 50 weight thread. For my quilt, I'm going to be using the Primrose Garden, and I chose a neutral color here, color 2311, 2026, color 2000. All of those would go really well for this block. Some nice sharp quilting pins. I have some on a magnetic pin cushion here. Very nice and fine and long with glass heads. My favorite rulers are rulers that we produce here in the store, and the Big Mama, Rotary Mate, Big Daddy, and Rotary Rule are all great rulers for really doing nearly everything that you need to do for this quilt. Sew-lined ceramic lead pencils are my favorite marking utensils. They come in a variety of colors. I just brought down the green. Today I'm going to be using the charcoal for a demonstration today. Quick quarter ruler. This little plastic molded utensil will help make your half square triangles a breeze. This is the 12-inch size that we'll be using today, but the 8-inch size here is helpful to have in your tool drawer as well. Of course, you are going to want this pattern. We do have them available separately if you wanted to play along. And a new gadget that I have been playing with is this little presser tool. It's the Roll and Press by Clover, and it can help open your seams without using heat if you wanted to be pressing along the way. So now let's look and see what fabrics we are going to be using for our project. So I opened up a kit and I've opened it up. Of course, it came perfectly folded. And this here is the Primrose Garden, which is the cover color option of the booklet. This quilt takes 10 colors. So there are 6 different options that Moda has suggested. One of the things that several of our customers have come up and said, you know, I want to make this a little scrappy. And I'm saying go for it. What you're going to do is have no more than 10 colors in any given block. And if you are going for a scrappy option, all you need to do is select your colors for the block right before you are constructing it. If you have purchased the kit from us and you have received the entire yardage for your whole quilt, the beginning of this pattern booklet does have cutting instructions for how to cut out the whole quilt color by color. If you are working with this, what is really important to do is to stay organized with little baggies or other containers to help not only with the color that you have, but also with the size that you have made. What we're going to be doing today is we're showing you some of the cutting that we're going to be doing for block number 1. If you have received our Coastal Cool set, we are currently waiting on some fabric for everybody to have the full kit. So you have received your block number 1, and you then will be receiving block number 2 for future months. Okay. So when I'm working with my fabric, and especially when I'm working with something like this, what I like to do with my solids is actually mark in the corner with a marker. And let's look at this overhead. So I have marked my color 1, my color 2, my color 3. Do you see how I did that here? So it works really well, especially for solids. And when I'm working with colors, it just helps stay a little organized so that you know what you're working with along the way. If you are working with printed fabrics, you absolutely can do this as well. I wouldn't be using a Sharpie pen on something that I would glued in my quilt because of the acid. This might turn colors over time, but for just being a permanent mark for indication of what kind of fabric it is perfectly acceptable. Okay, so that is all of the nuts and bolts of how to stay organized. Let us work with cutting our first strip. So I'm not going to be giving you all of the dimensions for what we're doing while this is a for purchase pattern here. But one thing that's really important is learning different techniques. So for this particular block, you are going to need some larger sized strips. And when I'm working with larger sized strips, I still only use my 2 rulers. So are we looking up or down? We are down. Okay, so we have 2 rulers here, and you can see this one goes 1 through 3.5. There are these numbers on the side if we're putting two rotary mates together. We're not going to be putting two rotary mates together. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting the Big Mama, which is 6.5, together with the rotary mate. So you can see here how these numbers continue. Do you see that? So it goes 1 through 3.5 and then picks up 3/4, 4, all the way down to 10. We need to make a straight cut, and then I'm going to show you how to cut a 7-inch strip. So I have prepared this fabric. I've pre-starched it and I have folded it so that it is ready to go. I like to work with my width of fabric, fold it in half when I cut it so that the least amount of acrylic is on the least amount of fabric to help me have more accurate cutting. For my straight cut, I am going to align a straight edge. You see here how this perpendicular edge on my fold, and then I butt up this edge here so that I can get a nice clean cut. So we line up here to be able to cut there. Does that make sense? Okay. So now that I've made that cut, I'm going to rotate the fabric around. And then for a 7-inch strip, I am going to line up this line right here that says 7, right here. And then I am going to butt up my rotary mate, which adds the rest of the 7 inches. And remember I said that I wanted to use the least amount of acrylic on the least amount of fabric? I am going to put my hand pressure down here. This wider ruler now makes no difference at all. We're going to make our nice cut right there. So now we have a beautiful 7-inch strip. For this case, I'm actually going to open it up. I am going to make a straight cut on the end. So I'm going to line up my bottom edge here. I'm going to butt up my Big Mama. I'll cut off my selvage. And then I am going to repeat where I line up my 7-inch, both on this perpendicular and the 7-inch line. I'm going to butt up my rotary mate, let go of the wide ruler, and cut. Voila, wasn't that easy? So you can cut through as many layers as you are comfortable with. I typically cut through 2 to 4 layers at a time. Now that we have learned how to cut a wider strip of fabric, I'm going to show you how to mark to get a half square triangle. So I am going to take a green, which I pre-cut, and this cream. So this actually would work to make the fabric that I have. Let's look at the quilt here behind me. This would be the center square that we would work on. So all of this is constructed with half square triangles. There would be other ways that you could make this block. However, we are working with some half square triangles today. So I'm going to work with a pair of squares here. A pair of square yields 2 half square triangles. Let's look down on the board and see how we mark, prep, and stitch this. Okay, so I have layered my 2 squares together. I am going to take my 12-inch quick quarter ruler. I'm going to line this up right at the point and on the point on the other side. So here I can see it right through the gap, and here I'm lining up that corner. I'm going to take my Soline ceramic lead pencil and I am going to mark on the edge here. Now it's important when I'm marking the edge that I get in as close as I can to the edge of the ruler, okay? I prefer to mark the edge where I'm actually going to sew on, so that I'm marking my sew line rather than marking in the middle that I would then use my foot to find out where my 1/4 inch is. And then I'm going to come on the other side. If I had a spinny mat, I could just spin the mat around. It's important when you mark this that you don't stretch the fabric, especially with a larger square like this. It could be easy to pull and then you would be stretching that fabric along. I'm going to pin this. When I'm pinning for my half square triangles like this, I'm going to pin in the center. So pinning this will help stabilize the stretch. As I'm sewing, keeping it together is going to be easier to have it not stretch than if I had cut it apart to sew 2 triangles separately. But it is important to watch that stretch while you are working with something this large. So let's hop over to our sewing machine. I have some neutral thread in, and I'm just going to go up to my machine and start sewing on the line. You can go as slow or as fast as you like, and I'm going to take my pins out along the way. You don't want to sew over those pins even though they're fine. Sewing on pins is horrible for sewing machines, so don't do that. I used to be brave and sew over pins all the time, but that's not such a good idea. If I'm working on this quilt, what I would do is I would actually prepare all of my pairs of squares so that I could sew all of them in a row. Okay, so I'd get them all prepped up and then chain stitch them. I am going to cut, and then I'll come on the other side to sew. So this is the beauty of working with your quick 1/4 ruler. You just simply sew on the lines. I prefer the Sew Line ceramic lead pencil rather than using something like, let's say, a friction pen for this, because the marking is going to be staying on the fabric that I'm using in the quilt, and I know that this particular marking utensil just sits on the top of the fabric. So let's come back over to our overhead camera, and what we're going to do is I'm going to cut this apart. So I'm just cutting down the center, and how I did it is I lined up my ruler point to point, and I'm just going to cut it apart. Okay, I can also trim off my threads. As I do this here, make sure to not scrape your blade along the edge because that dulls your blade quicker. Then we're going to press. So let's look at the quilt behind me while I'm pressing here. I have an iron heated up, ready to go. I do use a dry iron when I do this, and I like to press my seams open. So I do a quick open with my thumbnails when I do this. If you like to press to one side, by all means do that. It's just something that I have gotten accustomed to. And what you do want to do as you're pressing, so what I do is that, remember, pressing, anything in quilting takes the least amount of exercise. So we're putting the heat on and holding, heating and holding. I'm not ironing by going back and forth. I'm heating and holding, okay? So I'm pressing it. And I'm repeating just with the second one here. So you can see each pair of squares yields 2 half square triangles. Now this particular pattern has us making triangles that are slightly larger than the final size that we're going to need. So I'm going to show you some ways that we can square these up. Ta-da! All done. So once again, dry iron for this, and you've prepared your fabrics with starch, so it gets a nice crisp finish here. For squaring up our units, let's use this guy here. There's a couple different ways that you can do it. I told you that the series of rulers that we have at the store here really work for just about everything. We're going to be squaring these up to 6.5 inches. So if I were to use my Big Daddy ruler, which is 6.5 inches wide, it has a 45-degree line, and I would just place this line on top of the block, right on the seam line here, and I would make sure that I'm centered so that I have a little bit of fabric on each side. And then what I can do is I can cut and then rotate the mat and cut on the other side and then repeat on the top and bottom, okay? Another method that you can use is using one of the square up rulers that we have from June Taylor. We have the original perfect half and quarter square triangle ruler that goes up to a size 6.5. So you could place that on top, and it is a slot ruler. So we center this line here on our seam line, our 45-degree line. Make sure that we have hang off beyond both of our slots, and then we're able to cut and then rotate and repeat. Similarly, this squared straight ruler was designed for a little bit larger blocks, and so we're going to use this one today. So this is squared straight on the half, so it is for a cut of a half square triangle going 5.5 up to 10.5. And I'm just going to shimmy this up because it's important that you're fitting the block within the margins here, okay? So I want to make sure that I have a little bit hangover on all 4 sides. I've lined up right there. And to use this slot ruler, I'm going to introduce my blade at a slight angle at the teardrop that we need. 6.5. And the 6.5. And then we're just going to take away the little schnibbies, rotate. If you had a rotating mat, this would be an excellent use for that rotating mat. Lining up on the other side, you will have the 6.5 line up on the top and the bottom. Introduce at a slight angle. When you're using a slot ruler, you want to make sure to introduce at the teardrop and not in the center. And you have a perfectly perfect half square triangle unit. If you're doing a lot of these, what I'd recommend is taking a little bit of tape. So you could either use this tape here, or if you had a different washi tape hanging around, and with this tape, what you would do is you actually, I didn't start this one here, you actually then cover where you don't want to cut. Do you see that there? So we would cover it up so that we make sure that we're cutting in the right slot. If you're working on, let's say, 10 or more of these that are all the same size, sometimes we get into a rhythm and we forget which slot we're on. So this can be a helpful thing by just taping up the length that you don't want to use. So I'm just going to finish here. I have a little craft scissor here. Covered up both of the 5.5s here. so that we'd be ready to go on our 6.5 size. Make sense? Okay, so after you have all of your half square triangle units together, you will arrange them as the pattern has shown. Here you're making some 4 patches first, and then putting all of your 4 patches together as a giant 9 patch. I told you that I press my seams open. That is true, except when I'm joining things and they want to go a different way. So nobody's looking at the back side of your quilts, and if the fabric wants to go a different way, let it go a different way so that your seams join up really nice. Make sure when you're joining your blocks together that you do pin, okay, especially because these blocks are larger than some of the other shapes that you might be working with. The larger the block, the more pins that you're going to want to be putting in it. So for something like this, I would put likely 3 pins in. So I'd be pinning at the seam intersections and then 1 in the middle. As you're working on your seam intersections going together, you will want to make sure that you have a 1/4 inch seam. We're going to just take a brief moment to talk about that 1/4 inch seam. I had talked last week about a 1/4 inch test, but in case if you didn't watch it, I want to show it to you again. So the 1/4 inch test is something that we do in all of our beginning classes as well as all of our other piecing classes. Just always a nice validation to make sure that we are still practicing good technique. Having a good 1/4 inch will help us have more accurate results. More accurate results makes easier piecing. The easier piecing is lots of fun. If you're not having fun, you stop quilting. And if you stop quilting, well, then you're not buying fabric. And that makes me sad. So we don't want me to be sad. So we need to make sure that your 1/4 inch seam is spot on. Does that sound good? All right. So to test this out, what you're going to do is you are going to, we can look overhead now. We can just get 1.5 colors, 1.5 pieces of fabric. So here I have 3 pieces of fabric that are 1.5 by 4 inches. And I just sewed these together. And after sewing them together, you want to make sure that 3 1.5 pieces, 3 1.5 pieces measure 3.5 inches across. If it does not, number 1, you check, did I cut this correctly? Number 2, how did I press it? Was I sloppy when I pressed it, and do I have that little lip that hangs over? And number 3, you then will check to see how consistent and wide was this seam. If you can spot it, repeat so that you can improve upon the technique. If you can't see where you're going wrong, please send us a picture or come on in and we'll be more than happy to help you with figuring out where you're going wrong with your 1/4 inch seam. So I hope those techniques have helped you with your first block. This is going to be a lot of fun along the way. We have split out our block of the month from our Moda University. Moda University is next week, and we have some new fabrics to show you and some other projects lined up. One other fun thing that we have coming up next week Tuesday, is we have a Shannon Cuddle Throw class. And I'm going to quick grab that throw so that I can show it to you in case if you haven't seen it. So give me 2 seconds. This Cuddle Throw features the Cuddle Luxe fabric, which is the super plush textured fabric that we carry upstairs. For the class, all you need is 2 yards, which we have several different options available to you. We'd even be able to pop it in the mail or have it available for drop-off. And then we have a Zoom class with the local educator. And that class is included free with any purchase of the 2 yards of Cuddle Luxe. And we also have a packet of patterns available for you. So let's take a look at this. This one is the larger size. Ooh, isn't that soft and yummy and drapey? It's a soft, cozy project, quick finish, which is great for this time of year, great for yourself or for gift giving. And I know Frank and I actually each have one on the couch so that we don't have to fight over it at home. And we enjoy ours very much as an accessory in our decor. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Ask us any questions in the store. We look forward to seeing you. Happy quilting.